Well, good morning, Dr. Kathi, and thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Good morning. Yeah, it's great to see you again.
It is good to see you again. You've been a dear friend of mine since I met you at Created Equal, and since then you've prayed for our team and also for just the inception of Tiny Heartbeat Ministries when we first got started. Could you introduce yourself to our audience?
My name is Dr. Kathi Aultman. I'm a board-certified OBGYN, currently retired after about 33 years of practice. I got my medical degree at the University of Florida and subsequently did my OBGYN residency in Jacksonville through an affiliated program. There, I was one of the founders and co-directors of the Rape Treatment Center. I have always been an advocate for women, and I think that explains a lot about why I did the things that I did. I'm currently an associate scholar with the Charlotte Lozier Institute, and although I once did abortions, I'm now a pro-life advocate, and I speak before legislatures, Congress, and in court regarding pro-life issues.
So thanks for coming on today.
You're welcome.
I understand that you used to perform first and second trimester abortions earlier in your medical career. You once told me that you were a preacher's kid. Could you share with me what happened that led you into this practice?
Well, by the time I got to college, I was basically an atheist. When you're a preacher's kid, you see a lot of the background stuff that goes on, and I thought if these people were really Christians, they wouldn't do the things that they did. And so by the time I got to college, I was an atheist. I made some bad decisions and ended up pregnant in between college and medical school, and decided to have an abortion. I felt that if I kept the baby, I wouldn't be able to be a doctor. I thought that if my husband and I went ahead and got married because I was pregnant, we'd end up with a divorce. And I was afraid of what my family and friends would think, so I made the choice to have an abortion. That sort of, I think, colored my opinions when I entered my OBGYN residency. I truly felt that abortion should be a right. A woman shouldn't have to bear a child that she didn't want. And I was determined to provide abortion care to women to the best of my ability. What most people don't know is that all OBGYNs have to train in abortion unless they opt out because of conscience. And that's something that's critical. That's something that's under attack right now. They want to take that right away. But I did not opt out. I not only learned how to do first trimester abortions through the program, but I went outside the program and did a preceptorship to learn how to do D&E procedures, or dismemberment, second trimester procedures. And that was pretty uncommon for those days. I didn't see the fetus as any different than a chick embryo. And so I had no problems doing the abortions. Someone like Abby Johnson in Unplanned, looking at fetal parts was not disgusting to me. I looked at it totally scientifically, not like this was a little person. And so I was fascinated by the little fingers and toes and the perfectly formed organs. And I used to send specimens to pathology to see what the tissues looked like in the fetus. So I really had compartmentalized all of that, and so that's how I started doing abortions. I also after I got my license, we were able to moonlight, and I ended up moonlighting at an abortion clinic, and I felt really good about that.
Thanks for sharing that with us. You mentioned a D&E procedure. Could you explain what that is and what that looks like?
Well, basically, it's done in the second trimester. So generally, around 15 weeks, 14, 15 weeks is when people start doing that procedure. It's when the fetal tissues have become too firm to just be slurped into the suction machine that we use for first trimester abortions. And what has to be done is you have to actually dismember the fetus. You have to, basically we dilate the cervix. Oftentimes that has to be done over 1 to 2 days using a seaweed or something else to dilate the cervix slowly. We then use the same suction we would for a first trimester abortion and remove the fluid from the uterus to bring the baby down closer to the cervix. We then would reach in with our forceps and try to pull off whatever we can grab, usually an arm or a leg. And when we can't grab anymore, we open it wider and try to grasp the thorax or the head and crush them and then pull them out and then do some more suctioning and finish the procedure. But it's a pretty gruesome and barbaric procedure.
When you have the fetus, the baby, extracted completely, is there anything else left to be done?
Well, you have to get the placenta. You have to go back and make sure there aren't any remaining parts. And so you have to reconstruct the fetus. You have to take all the little parts and put it back together to make sure that nothing's left to cause infection. And you have to make sure she's not bleeding.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that with us. What changed your mind? What led that? I mean, now you're a pro-life advocate. What changed your mind?
Well, I continued to do abortions even when I was pregnant. I continued to moonlight up until almost term. And it's funny, you'd think, well, isn't that a contradiction? But my feeling was my baby was wanted and their babies weren't, so I saw no problem with it. But when I went back to the clinic to work after my maternity leave, I ran into 3 patients that changed my mind. The first, I had done 3 previous abortions on her, and I hadn't been doing them that long. So I went to the manager of the clinic and told her I didn't want to do it, that I had already done 3 procedures on her. She was just using it for birth control. And they said, well, that was her right, and I didn't have any right to refuse. And I looked at her and said, well, that's okay for you to say, but I'm the one doing the killing. But I went ahead and did her procedure. And sure enough, afterwards, she wouldn't accept any birth control, and she wanted to just keep having abortions. The second woman came in with her girlfriend, and after the procedures, the girlfriend asked her if she wanted to see the tissue, and she said, no, I just want to kill it. And I thought, oh my gosh, what has this baby done to you? The baby hasn't done anything. And then the third patient had already had 4 children, and she and her husband didn't feel they could afford another child. And she cried throughout her whole time in the clinic. And I didn't know exactly why, but after that, I could not do abortions. I could not kill babies just because they weren't wanted. So I didn't understand at the time what exactly happened, but when I was testifying one time, God showed me that it was the apathy of the first patient and the hostility of the second contrasted with the just despair of the woman who knew what it was to have a child that brought me to the place where I couldn't anymore just kill babies because they weren't wanted. The unfortunate thing is was that I still believed in abortion. I believed in a woman's right to an abortion, and that didn't change for several years.
I understand you work as a pro-life advocate now. How did God lead you into this ministry?
Well, as I was in practice, I noticed that young women who kept their pregnancies were doing really well, whereas young women who were getting abortions were struggling with the physical consequences and also the psychological consequences of abortion. And that wasn't what I had expected. I really had bought, the feminist agenda. I'd really bought the feminist agenda, hook, line, and sinker. I also saw young women in my church who could have had abortions but didn't, raise these beautiful little children that I ended up teaching in Sunday school class. And I just couldn't imagine them not being there. So that sort of changed things. I also became a Christian during that time, but I still believed in abortion. And it took God another year or two to finally change my mind. And that happened when a Christian friend, after we'd been friends a while and I trusted him, said, "Kathi, I know you feel strongly about abortion, but would you read this article?" The article, well, let me say first, my father fought in World War II, and he was with the unit that opened or liberated the very first concentration camp. Because of that, I grew up with all those pictures and stories, and I never could understand how the Germans did what they did, especially the physicians. Well, this article compared the abortion to the Holocaust. And for the first time, I saw myself as a mass murderer. And I understood how the Germans could do what they did, the Nazis could do what they did, because they did not consider their victims to be human. And I didn't consider the fetus to be human. And so you can do whatever you want if you don't consider them as people.
Wow. That's powerful. So I understand that you now work as a pro-life advocate, your part-time job. And you go around speaking, different venues and banquets and in front of Congress. I'm curious, did you go right into that right after you changed your mind? Was there a gap there? What did God do to kind of usher you from not just changing your mind, but now working to, in a sense, undo the abortion holocaust we have in America?
So, fortunately, at this point, God put people into my life that could help me with prayer and counseling to help me get over suddenly realizing, I was a murderer. And I remember seeing an email come in, and they wanted someone to go to Washington to testify on the partial birth abortion. And so I answered it. And they didn't need me to do that right then, but that opened the floodgates so that I ended up speaking throughout the country to different legislatures and in court on partial birth abortion. And I just, I just had told God that I wanted to do something. That was 20-something years ago. And that finally all died down, and I just sort of went back to my practice. Then, unfortunately, I ended up becoming allergic to everything and having to leave my practice on disability. And after recovering for about 1.5 years, not being able to leave my home, I was praying one day and I said, "God, please let me still do something important." I'd always had visions of being a missionary or something when I retired, and I couldn't do that, not being allergic to my gloves and gowns and all that stuff. A week later, I got a call from a woman who'd been trying to reach me and didn't know how to get me. And she wanted me to testify before Congress on the heartbeat bill, which I did. And again, the floodgates opened, and I ended up running all over the country testifying. Charlotte Lozier approached me and wanted me to become an associate scholar. I delayed about 6 months because I was afraid that then I'd really, really be overwhelmed. But that actually ended up being a good thing. The first time I was testifying, I was completely alone. The different groups that would ask me to testify would usually take care of me, and get me in the right place while I was, speaking for them. But I never had any sort of parent organization or anything to help me with research or with costs. I was always trying to scramble to find a way to, get my airline ticket paid for. So once I joined Charlotte Lozier Institute, then they would cover my airline and travel expenses if I went somewhere to testify.
That's really cool. Would you share the story about being in front of the Senate where they were upset because you were describing the abortions really graphically?
I don't remember which legislature it was, but the bill was a dismemberment bill. And so I was simply describing what the procedure is. And they got upset because I was being so graphic. And I said, but that's what the procedure is. And if it's too hard to listen to, isn't it wrong to do it? It's crazy.
I remember when you shared that story with me, that just stuck out because we experienced that a lot. In fact, yesterday I was with a young man who was complaining that when we show the pictures of abortion, it's too graphic to look at. And I was a little quizzical at him because he was pro-choice. And I'm thinking, if it's too graphic to look at, why do you think it should exist?
Yeah.
So, and that leads me to the next question. As God would have it, that's how we met. I was doing my internship with Created Equal, and we met over Zoom. We've never actually met in person, which is crazy, especially with you being on our PER team for the last year and a half. But you were just giving your testimony to the intern class at Created Equal, and that's how I got to know you. And one of the questions I remember asking you a couple of years ago was what you thought about abortion victim photography, showing the images of aborted babies out in public squares, college campuses, high schools, abortion clinics, downtown squares. And we use that in our ministry when it's appropriate. We obviously stay away from high populations of children, but when we go to public places, we use that because we want to show people what abortion really is. With your unique experience being a post-abortive woman and a former abortionist who's now become a Christian, I'm curious if you could speak into that issue because it's pretty controversial, and even in pro-life circles.
Well, the thing is that the abortion industry has been very effective in changing the language around abortion. We're not killing a baby, we're terminating a pregnancy, okay? And basically what they tell women is it's just a blob of tissue, it's not a baby. It's gotten a little better since with some of the pro-life laws that have required them to tell patients, okay, you're at this stage, this is what your baby would look like. But the thing is that people accept abortion because they don't really know what it is. I think if most people truly knew what was happening in abortion, they wouldn't agree with it. And so to say, well, you shouldn't show those gory pictures is sort of crazy. It's like, oh, well, don't show me pictures of masters beating slaves because that's just too hard to look at. But it was those very pictures that began changing people's opinion about slavery. And I think the same is true with abortion. That's reality. That's really what happens. That's what the abortionist has to look at. That's why there aren't very many abortionists. It's not all theoretical. It has to do with not many normal people can sort through baby parts every day that they have destroyed, and then turn around and deliver babies. That's really hard to do. So I think that there's definitely a place for these these pictures that show aborted baby parts, because that's what abortion is. And if you can't stomach those pictures, well, then maybe we shouldn't be doing abortions.
Thank you for sharing that. I get a couple of responses, and I'm just curious if I could run them by you, from people who are very pro-life, but especially here in the Northwest, really uncomfortable with using those pictures. I've had people tell me that seeing the pictures makes them feel manipulated. How would you respond to that?
Well, it confuses me when you say manipulated. The thing is, that's the truth of abortion. I'm not sure how you're manipulating them. You are getting them to look at it at a deeper level, perhaps. It does cause people to react. But, is it manipulative to show pictures of Black people after they've been lynched, or their backs after they've been flogged? Those are the things that change people's hearts and minds.
Here's another question for you. We at Tiny Heartbeats do our best to keep young children from seeing the graphic pictures by not going to high areas with high populations of children. But in public squares, public spaces, inevitably some do. How would you respond to someone who says the abortion pictures should not be used in any public context because children could see them and be traumatized by them?
And I think that's the parents' job to protect their children. There are all kinds of images and all kinds of things out there that children should not see. And, parents just have to be aware. If there's a big billboard that has aborted baby parts on it, then the parent should distract the kid. And it doesn't mean that the billboard shouldn't be there.
We oftentimes use the abortion pictures outside of abortion clinics. And so women go inside and they're considering considering the procedure they're about to go into, and they see those pictures. And I've heard some people get pretty nervous about what that might do to their psyche, to their emotional state, seeing something so graphic right before, one of the worst day of their lives. How would you speak into that?
I have to tell you that as I've been testifying, I've run into a lot of women that have had abortions, and some of them have been really traumatized by the fact that they thought they were aborting a blob of tissue, and then later they found out, by looking at videos or pictures of babies at the same gestational age that they would have been, and they're horrified to find out that was what they aborted, that they aborted a baby that big. And I really think that women that are contemplating abortion, they need informed consent. They need to know exactly what they're doing. If they're going to abort a baby at 18 weeks or almost 20 weeks, and it's going to be a dismemberment abortion, they need to understand what their baby's going to be going through, because if they find out later and they weren't warned ahead of time, it's even worse. So it really is a matter of informed consent. And I think actually they should see what the procedure is. I think that's important. If they see the procedure or see the effects of the procedure and they still want to proceed with the abortion, then that's a decision that they've made. But for them to go in blindly and then find out later, oh, they did this by taking the babies apart without any anesthesia, oh my gosh, my baby was this big. My baby looked like a baby. I think it's important. I really do. So I think there's a place. I think there's also a place for compassion and for pregnancy centers who are so wonderful about saying, basically, what will it take, for you to not to have this abortion? There's adoption, and there's even open adoption where you can have some contact with that baby if you want. There are so many other things that a woman can do besides having an abortion, and they need to understand those things.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes when we're on college campuses, post-abortive women walk by and they see the pictures that we have displayed. How do you respond to someone who says you shouldn't use these pictures in public context because it will re-traumatize women who've had abortions, especially being post-abortive yourself?
The thing is that they did have an abortion. It was a choice that they made. Does that mean that you should continually try to hide the truth? For one thing, if they continue to be blind about what they actually did and what actually happened, they may choose to do it a second time. And then, you've got a compounded problem. So the thing is, it's the truth. And it's not your job to protect people from the truth. And maybe that sounds hard, but all you're doing is probably delaying the inevitable, because at some point, most women do come to the realization of what they've done. And maybe it's better that it come earlier and she can begin to deal with it. I don't know.
Perfect.
We do all kinds of things that are wrong, and it's not other people's job to prevent you from knowing the consequences of what you do.
Thank you. And thank you so much for volunteering your time with us today. If you're talking to someone and they sort of agree that abortion is bad, they don't really think of it as a big deal, what would you say to them and how would you respond?
I continued to believe in abortion even though I was a Christian. And it really takes, I think, other Christians coming alongside and gently asking that person to really reconsider what they're thinking and what does it mean. I think sometimes we accept ideas because we don't really look at them in depth. We don't look at the consequences of that ideology. And I think and the churches have not done a very good job in addressing abortion at all. And they need to do a better job. I think that's one of the goals of Focus on the Family is getting the churches to address this issue. I think it's terribly sad to think that there are so many Christians who are pro-choice. And I think part of it is we want to be good guys. We want to be compassionate. We don't want to make someone else do something, that they don't want to do. The typical thing, well, I would never have an abortion, but I don't want to make that decision for others. And it's because we have been so brainwashed. And somebody needs to unbrainwash us. Somebody needs to tell us the truth. Somebody needs to show us pictures of what abortion really is. And I don't know how that's going to turn around except by people being willing to speak the truth. If my friend hadn't been brave enough to give me that article comparing abortion to the Holocaust, I might have still been doing abortions. It takes holding people accountable for their beliefs and what do those beliefs really mean. There's responsibility, and our worldviews dictate how we see things, what we do. And Christians really need to rethink this whole thing. I mean, why are we destroying what God so carefully, created in the womb? Why is it okay that we can destroy that? I think they need to go back to their Bibles. And I think you guys need to challenge them.
If there's a woman watching this right now and she's post-abortive and this video has potentially triggered some of those emotions of regret and shame, if she's feeling this right now, what would you share with her?
Not only did I have an abortion, but I killed all those babies through abortion. And thankfully, we have a God who forgives and a God who heals. And I think prayer and counseling are critical. You need to do that so that you can heal. And it is possible. You can move on, but that's something that you do need to do. But I am just so thankful that God has forgiven me. And not only has he forgiven me, but he's redeemed it. And he's using the very thing that I'm most ashamed of to not reverse what I did, but give me the opportunity to save babies instead of killing them.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
And actually, let me say one thing more. He can also use your history and what you have done for his glory and to help others. So you just need to find out what he wants you to do. And then you just take one step forward. That's all I did. I took one step forward and suddenly God took over and that was it.
Amen. Check out the link in the description below, and you can follow that to another video at a website that'll share the gospel with you about how you can come to know Jesus, who died on the cross for our sins and rose from the dead, and start moving to the steps of healing and forgiveness, receiving that from the Lord. So my last question is on similar lines. I'd love you to respond as if you were directly talking to the person watching the screen right now. I'm often sitting across from men and women who are seriously considering sometimes supporting our ministry financially, or sometimes volunteering with us on outreach or some other commitment. And they're being held back by the fact that we use these pictures. It's like their one concern. It's kind of their hinge point. If you could say one last thing directly to them, like they're watching you right now, which I'm sure some of them will be, what would you say to them?
I think that the pictures of aborted baby parts really are an important part of the pro-life conversation and need to be a part of the tools that ministries can use. People need to see the truth about abortion, and abortion is ugly and horrible. And even when I still felt that abortion was okay, that it was a right, I have to tell you that it was seeing pictures of aborted baby parts, even though I myself had counted those baby parts earlier. It was seeing pictures of those aborted baby parts that also began to change my opinion about abortion, because it was somewhat removed from the actual procedure that I had done. And perhaps I was looking at it more objectively, but when I saw those pictures, I thought, oh my gosh, is that really what I used to do? We shouldn't be doing that. Mm. And yes, I think there's definitely a place. As a matter of fact, we must have compassion. We must love those who are post-abortion, considering abortion. We need to be sensitive and caring. We need to try not to show these pictures to children, but I think we need to be braver in showing them to adults. People need to stop kidding themselves about abortion. And the truth needs to be told. And this is a really important function. And I think that if you support this ministry, you will see people changing their hearts and minds about abortion.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers?
I would like to share that over the last few years, we have learned a whole lot more about fetal pain. And when I was doing abortions, I tried everything in my power to make abortion, which is a painful procedure, as painless as I could for my patients. Never once did I think about the pain the fetus was feeling. We now know that fetuses have sensory nerves in their face at 8 weeks. We know that they respond to painful stimuli. We know that definitely by 20 weeks, they can perceive pain and feel pain, and probably much earlier. The other thing is that we really have gone down the slippery slope. Originally, it was supposed to be, that abortions were rare and unfortunate. Now it's a right, and they can be done for any reason, basically up till term. Now we find out that there are places like University of Pittsburgh and in California where babies' organs are harvested. And from some of the undercover work that David DeLayden did, we know that there were people procuring these organs that found that the hearts were still beating. So those babies, some of these babies at least, had to be alive. And how far we've come that, this should appall everyone, that we are using abortion to feed an industry that is providing fetal parts for research. And people, it's almost as if they can justify the abortion because, something good is coming out of it. But this is so horrific. There are the people who want these tissues, they don't want the abortionist to use digoxin to kill the baby first because they want fresh tissue. And so now you've got these babies that are going through these horrendous procedures with no anesthesia. Excuse me. So now you've got these babies that we know can feel pain, being torn limb from limb, just so the tissue can be fresh. How can we even, how can we think that way? How can that even be happening today in our world?
Yeah. The University of Washington has the largest fetal tissue bank in our country, the largest depository of aborted baby body parts. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Just that abortion is a horrible, barbaric procedure. We have been brainwashed into thinking that it's necessary for women to have access to abortion in order to achieve their goals, to have equity in the world, which is untrue. We've been led to believe, it's just too hard to give a baby up for adoption. I don't know what's going to happen to that baby. Well, now there's open adoption. So adoption is a real answer. There are people who feel that, well, abortion is necessary because we don't want all these unwanted children in the world, because they might be abused or have something bad happen to them. Well, what's worse than killing them? At least they have a chance if they're here. Why is killing them the best idea? The whole time I was testifying, I kept feeling like saying, the emperor has no clothes. Why is this concept so hard to understand? Abortion is horrible. It's not the answer. Our government and our society have dropped the ball. Because abortion has been available, they haven't provided the services that women need in order to be able to raise their family and still contribute to society in other ways, to have careers. That's what we need to do. We need to be spending all this money we're spending on abortion needs to be spent on creating things to help women so that they can achieve their goals without having to resort to killing our children and killing off the next generation, basically.
Thank you.